Alright guys, so I gotta start my Enterprise J build. I finished it yesterday. I'm gonna go with a step-by-step guide on this build so that you understand why everything is in this build and kind of go from there. So first off, my 4 weapons, you can put whatever you want here, honestly, any kind of phaser. I personally like the pulse phasers because they're cheap and they make you tankier and reduce your opponent's defense rating at the same time, so pretty good. I need some healing power on this ship since it has very low healing ability. So I have some of the Elite Fleet Drainer phaser beams. Honestly, you could run all 8 of these. The most important thing is that you always want that 80% crit severity on these because the restoration is based on your crit severity. So as you can see, I've got the 80% on all these. The other stat, crit hit or damage, whatever you prefer, doesn't really matter. The red matter capacitor is important for this build. I'll explain that in a few seconds here. Kobayashi Maru, because why not? Whatever summon you prefer. If you like space garbage, then these are great. So I'm running 3-piece set for the prevailing set. This is very important because of the 3 set bonus you get here. It's going to massively increase your survivability. The shields I just threw all capacity on because honestly your shields aren't going to receive a lot of healing, so you just want a beefy amount to take those initial hits when you get hurt, and you should be fine. I threw on the Elite Fleet detector on here for several reasons. One, it's got the impulse expertise on it, so you got the improved turn rate, which is super important for this ship. I'll go over all the turn rate specs later. Second, it's one of your few sources of EPS. You gotta get that power transfer rate up as high as you can with this build. And critical hit chance, again, super important for this build because you're going to be depending on those crits. Shield pen is of course always great, and then of course you got your hull percentage, crit hits, crit severity on this, super awesome. This is probably one of the most important pieces of the set, the prevailing innervated impulse engines. The mods on them don't really matter that much. You actually can't re-engineer them, which is sad, but that's just what I got stuck with, is impulse, and I can't complain. You know, the extra turn rate is always super helpful with the ship. But the most important part is this prevailing engine overcharge right there, and it's just a godsend. It turns a slow, clunky ship like the Enterprise J into a super maneuverable tactical escort. It's super fun. I'll show you in the demo video how quickly it turns and drives around, and it's absolutely fantastic because you need those broadside hits. You need to get all 8 of those weapons in to do the damage, and this massively helps with that. On the other side, it also reduces your tactical bridge officer ability cooldown, which is another super important part of this build, and we're going to be going over that a little bit later. Warp Core is super awesome. It gives you some extra shield power, which is a big part of survivability on this ship. But the big thing here is the 3.3 all damage per subsystem. Now, when you're running the red matter capacitor for those 20 seconds, all of your subsystems are going to be above that amount. So you're going to get the full power out of this. I believe it's 13.2% extra damage, which is fantastic. I'm going to go into the engineering consoles here. Standard enhanced neutronium with flight turn rate. You could put EPS on this, but I just like the turn rate. Bound Rail Gel Pack is a pretty important part of this build. It buffs up all your subsystems, which are going to help you get that Warp Core bonus. And it's also giving you a big cooldown reduction to all your bridge abilities, which is going to be super important when I go over the bridge officer abilities, because cooldown reduction is a massive part of this build. And then some bonus shield capacity, so that's not bad. Defensive drones, more flight turn rate, and more importantly, the cooldown reduction on all bridge officer abilities again. Both fantastic. And then as a bonus, you get some drones every once in a while. I like to pop them before I go into combat. They fly around and they shoot stuff, obviously. Staple of a lot of builds that exist out there, Hull Image Refractors, fantastic console. 20% all damage, and gives you that temporary hit points on any heal, which will be super evident when you are popping the Elite Trainer heals when you're already at full. It's going to help you keep that. It's going to help you keep that bonus on these. Which one was it? This one, yes. It's going to help you keep that max hull percentage on the deflector. And it's a great emergency evac out of a situation. If you suddenly find yourself surrounded by, you know, dozens of ships and you're about to die, you know, just pop that Hull Image Refractors and you're good. It'll heal you back up to full, and then it'll heal you over full with those temporary hit points. Approaching Agony, phaser damage and crit hit chance, plus the actual ability in it's not super great, but we use it for the phaser damage and the crit hit chance. This is the Enterprise J stock console. I love it. It's super fun. The turn rate is obviously nice. The damage bonus is pretty minor, but the Toxic Utat Cannon is so fun. You just have to keep it on here. Plus you get the energy distributor on it too, which is a super big buff. And essentially you run the Toxic Utat Cannon, you fire it, and if you pop the energy distributor right after, you can fire it again within a few seconds, and then a third time a few seconds after that. So it's pretty nasty. It doesn't do a stupid high amount of damage, but it does enough damage for you to want to pop it off every once in a while. Domino console, again, a pretty standard universal console that a lot of phaser builds use. It is ridiculously overpowered. You don't even need the set bonuses. You just need that. Stupid OP. Great for clearing hordes and hordes of ships. For example, swarmers. If you're dealing with swarmers, I recommend not overcharging and just popping Domino, and you'll pelt all of them out super quick. Attack consoles, vulnerability locators, and vulnerability exploiters. You could use 2 and 2. You could even use 1 vulnerability and 3 exploiters. I don't recommend putting all of a single one, because then you kind of lose effectiveness on there. But this is just what I'm running. And then for the frigates, I just upgraded them to the elite frigates. You get these from the Fleet Starbase, I think, if I remember correctly. They're just great. They have a ton of abilities. They get fire at will, which is already great. They get high yield torpedoes and emergency powered weapons, so they're just DPS machines, at least as far as pets go. Alright, so next up I'm going to go into the crew stations. This is where everything is super important here. So for my 2 top slots, I have 2 Krenum tactical officers to get you that 20% cooldown reduction, which stacks on with all that other cooldown reduction. And once I get into my skills here in a second, there's more cooldown reduction, and that's essentially going to put you at your cooldown cap, which I'll explain later. But for now, I'm just going to go over what I have on. I'm going over Overwhelm Emitters, tactical ability, pretty standard. That's just for one of the Starship Masteries. You'll see why that's evident and important later. I have Chemosite Laced Weaponry, just a nice buff that doesn't put anything else on a global cooldown. Beam Overload 3, of course. I got Tactical Team 1, which is great for keeping those shields balanced, and of course the extra energy weapon damage and critical chance. I have some DOF abilities on there that show, or that improve that ability too, which keeps it at pretty low cooldown. It keeps it up most of the time. And then Attack Pattern Beta, just for the extra damage resistance rating reduction. For my engineering slots, Channel Deconstruction 1, mostly just for the Starship Mastery. I have Casual Reversion, again, mostly for the Starship Mastery that I'm going to show you here in a bit, but it's also a nice quick heal, just a pop very frequently. Emergency Powered Weapon should be set to auto. Directed Energy Modulation 3, super important. I'm running 2 of them so I can cycle them, and Engineering Team is a great basic heal. Science Team and Hazard Emitters, very standard. Just cycling those as frequently as possible, set to auto. Specializations, I'm running Constable as my secondary, just for the Armor Pen, and Command Officer I'm running mostly, honestly, for the hull capacity, which mixes with one of my Starship Masteries, which I will show you shortly here. Some of the abilities here are nice. I don't use torpedoes, so unfortunately the first one is fairly worthless. But most of these other abilities here are pretty great. As far as my skills go, you can see I'm pretty even split between engineering and command. You want that hull up as high as you can get it. It's really going to help you out. I try not to stack too many points in one thing because of the diminishing returns, so I put spare points in a lot of things. Targeting expertise, always super important. EPS, you need both points on EPS for this one. It's again, there's not a lot of consoles on this build that gives you EPS, so you gotta make up for it in other places. You can kind of see these marks here. Obviously, I said crit was important, so lots of points into crit. I'm ignoring Shield Pen on this build because it's just got so much raw damage that it just punches right through shields. So I just went straight into Hull Pen. Long range targeting center is super important for this build because while you are super maneuverable, you are not super escort maneuverable. So this will help buff up your DPS quite a bit. Just some basic points here. I filled out all my system potentials. Warp core efficiency is super important to get that warp core bonus. And you want advanced engineering readiness so that you can cycle those engineering abilities as frequently as possible for the masteries that I have on. And then of course you need the tactical readiness to maximize that cooldown reduction. So on to traits. Super important part of this build, super weapon ingenuity. You get this off of the Cindy Primate ship from the Lobby store. So it's pretty easy ship to get a hold of. You just need to do a bit of farming for it. And what that's going to do is, normally Beam Overload has a 30-second cooldown with a 15-second global cooldown and a 10-second duration. So the cooldown cap reduction is 50%, which takes you down to the global cooldown. Now, the global cooldown is 15 seconds, and then you have the 10-second plus 5-second duration gives you a 15-second duration and a 15-second cooldown. So you are constantly in Beam Overload, which is one of the super cool things about this build. Highly Specialized is another super important part of this build. Every time you pop Specialized skill, so either one of the command abilities or one of the temporal abilities, this goes off. It reduces the cooldown on all of the specialist abilities. Plus it gives you that healing buff and a crit chance buff, which is, again, a super important part of this build, the crit chance and the crit hit. The exotic particle generator ability is meh. It applies to your toxic attack cannon and a few other minor things, but for the most part you want the specialization, weapon specialization out of that. Directed energy flux is another super important part of this build. Every time you pop either a temporal ability or one of those two directed energy modulations I had on there that should be constantly cycling, you get 25% bonus damage on Beam Overload, and it already does times 4 damage, so that bumps it up to times 5 damage on your weapons, which is absurd. What I do is I'll usually have my casual reversion set to manual, and if I always need to make sure that my Beam Overload has that on, I just pop that and then I'm set. I know it's active. The other two skills, there are things that you could put in here. For now I just have Standoff and the new shield alignment ability, but there's lots of cool things you could put in here. You could put in Heart of Soul, or any other just cool ability that you like and you enjoy playing with. Space Rep, first and foremost, is the chronocapacitor array. Gotta have that on. Gotta get that'll finish off the last few percentage of cooldown reduction that you need for this build, and help keep you in that Beam Overload 100% of the time. Crit severity and crit hit chance, both, of course. I honestly just really like having the ADR on the ship, and I felt like using 2 engineering slots for neutroniums was kind of a waste and reducing my overall damage output by more than it was worth, so I decided to use a space reputation slot to use that instead. There are other things you could put in here. I'm not going to go over them right now. There's tons of stuff out there that buffs up your damage. You can take it off if you want. Tyler's Duality, however, is a massive part of this build. As you can see, it's based off of your hull capacity, up to 6%. So typically with this build, it's sitting at about 4 to 5%, depending on what space skills your teammates are using, and there's a lot of those that like increase the hull capacity of your team and stuff like that. So that it kind of varies around. I'm sure there's a way to get it up to 200,000, but I also feel like you would be pulling too much DPS from other sources to get that up there. My active reps, honestly, these are just a preference thing. None of them are raw DPS buffs. Just pick whatever you want and have fun with. Terran targeting systems are super important for this build. 15% crit severity is massive. You don't need a lot of speed. I wouldn't worry about that, the penalty from it, especially because you're getting a 300% buff to your speed all the time. So 10% is kind of minor. Self-modulating fire is another pretty important part of this build. I have 0 shield pen from my skills, as you saw, so the temporary 50% shield pen is pretty fantastic. Superior beam training, you get the upgraded version from the fleet, I think it's K7? It's K7 or K13, I forget which one, but it's the fleet one that's from the original series. There's a trainer on there that will give you the upgraded skills. Bulkhead technician for the maximum hit points. Fleet coordinator, because you're pretty much always having a full team whenever you're doing TFOs. Redirected armor plating. This one is absolutely fantastic. You're zipping around in circles all the time. Your broadside should always be facing your target, so 99% of the time you're always getting hit from your sides. And 30% damage rating is absurd. Super elusive. It's just extra defense rating. You could swap this one out, honestly, with something else if you enjoy it more. Adaptive offense is a phenomenal freaking skill. That critical chance bonus that goes into critical severity is absurd. Like, you know, this build already has so much critical hit chance on it that you should be getting about 7 to 8 of that max 9%, maybe even a little bit more depending on how many of your procs are going off at once. You might get that full 9%. It's just really good. Operative, mostly for the 1% chance. 1% may not seem like a lot, but when you take 1% and 2% and 3% from so many different sources and stack them all together, you get this absurd, like, 50% critical hit rating. And I just prefer to use it. And then innocuous, just a little crit severity bump, never hurts. Alright, am I forgetting anything? I don't think I am. Alright, so I'm just going to do a quick patrol here. I prefer search and rescue. It's great. First, let's pump it up to elite here, just to show you how the ship performs.
Good to see you, my friend.
Yes, good to see you, weird bald lady. Alright, so as you can see, the standard turn rate of the ship is about what you'd expect, maybe a little better because of all the turn rate consoles that are on it. So let's pop my beam overload, and instantly I become a highly maneuverable machine. Keeping that broadside active. You see how quickly I get that that speed bonus back. I got the bug. There's a bug with beam overload where sometimes it just doesn't activate and it puts it on cooldown. So that's what that was. Now you see all these criticals. It's like all criticals popping up here. Well, it was there for a second, but this is just the base of the ship here. So for the next encounter, I'm going to start throwing on some of my abilities and show you how that works out. I just did a big no-no there. I let my cooldown run out when I was going away from my opponent. Don't do that. And just for fun, I don't know if I actually hit him with that.
We did it.
Alright.
Klingon vessels are warping into your position.
Alright, let's turn on some abilities here. Sometimes I actually have to turn my, why am I set to thruster output? No wonder I feel like I'm doing less damage. There we go. Scan.
Truly.
Scan.
Our systems.
That's nice.
Just one less rip to worry about. Let's begin the market.
Bad news, I'm afraid. Klingons are approaching our position.
Straight to the battleship. Reorient myself for this cruiser apart. So now I'm having all these ships shoot at me and just pop my image refractors. It's weird it didn't do it the first time. And I just popped straight back up. Now the fun thing about this is you can actually pop lots of abilities when you're... Was I just hit with a viral impulse burst while I was cloaked? am getting hit a lot because I'm only at half of these. I hate Virulent Pulse Burst more than anything. Virulent Pulse needs to go die in a fire. So there you go. That's the end of this video.
I think that indeed.
Actually, you know what? Let's just show you my DOS real quick. Fabrication engineers, okay. Con officer, pretty important to this build. If I could have 3 purples, I would, but I don't right now. Great to keep that recharge time low and keep the single one cycling. Energy weapons officer is alright. You know, I might replace it with honestly, I don't know, it's in there somewhere. Actually, alright, it's somewhere. Maybe replace it with evasive maneuvers cooldown reduction 1, wherever that's at. Crit severity, crit chance, energy weapons officers are stupid expensive on the market, but they're, if you got money to blow, do it. They're great. Okay, now that's the end of the build video, so I will maybe catch you again later for another build video. So I will see you then.